Shalom and welcome to Inside Israel News, your source for unbiased and thorough analysis of Israeli news, politics, and current events in the Middle East. I'm your host, Isaac Kite. Well, it has been an incredible week for news in Israel, so I have a lot to talk about today. It's going to take up a full episode just talking about the current events and the election. So I'm going to dive right in. When it comes to the virus, Israel is not going to have another lockdown before the election, according to the government, even though the virus czar, or leader of the effort against the virus, has said that another lockdown might be valuable. Israelis are not going to tolerate another lockdown before the election. Also, fewer than 3% of new cases are coming from those who are already vaccinated, so Israel is feeling that the vaccine has been a great success. Also, we have news that they will no longer be enforcing masks outdoors. So when people are outdoors without masks, that's not going to be any kind of issue in Israel. And travel restrictions are going to be lightened. People are going to be able to travel to Israel and from Israel with greater ease. So Israel is trying to get rid of, to a certain degree, of all of the virus lockdowns and controls and return to some state of normalcy now that the vaccine has been distributed. Also, Palestinian workers who are guest workers in Israel will also be receiving the vaccine so that they can work in Israel and not carry it back to the Palestinians or carry it from them to Israelis. So that's going to begin shortly. In another fascinating bit of news, Israeli fighters escorted a U.S. B-52 bomber in a show of force against Iran. Another in a series of events designed to remind the Iranians that the United States still has its thumb on them, and Israel is ready to take action in coordination with its allies, the U.S. and new Arab allies, at any time. The United States has continued its state of emergency regarding Iran that has been in existence since 1995, and it seems that the Biden administration is going to have to take a tougher line on Iran than they had hoped. There doesn't seem to be, at this point, a path back to the Iran deal of the Obama administration. So the Biden administration is trying to move in that direction, but reality seems to be centered on having to be tough on Iran, keep the sanctions on, and keep on the pressure until the Iranians are really ready to sit down and talk and be serious about their nuclear program. So it seems that President Trump, in changing U.S. foreign policy and toughening up restrictions there and on Iran, has created a change in the reality in the Middle East that the new administration cannot reverse. They may be able to dry up the funding for the Abraham Accords, as was described in last week's episode, but they're not going to be able to change the new reality in the Middle East. There are a number of fascinating political stories coming up, so stay with me. There are times when my analysis is so on point, so accurate, that I impress even myself. In the last few episodes, I've talked a little bit about how Yair Lapid is polling in a strong second-place position, and how even though Gideon Sa'ar is looked on as the main competitor to Bibi Netanyahu for an anti-Bibi coalition, Lapid would be someone who would be in the way of such a coalition, having more seats, that is, being the second-place party. It would make sense for him either to lead the government or to have a rotation in office in leading the government if a government is formed that is not led by Bibi Netanyahu. Now, Gideon Sa'ar is polling in a strong third, and as a more right-wing politician, he is more popular than Lapid as far as succeeding Netanyahu, because he draws in a lot of right-wing votes and supporters than obviously Lapid would. The fact remains, Lapid is outpacing him politically. Lapid is ahead in the numbers game, in the multi-party proportional system, as I've described in the supplements. So this puts Yair Lapid in something of an awkward position. Here is a man who has long aspired to be prime minister, to lead a new center-led left coalition, and that ambition is well known. It's been in the 8 years since he entered politics, almost 9 years now. He has made it very clear that his goal is to have the big job one day. And polls bear out that Israeli voters find him a popular alternative, but not as popular as other alternatives to Bibi Netanyahu. A recent poll, if Bibi Netanyahu were not in consideration for prime minister, who would you prefer to be prime minister, found that 28% of respondents to the poll, and again, there's accuracy in polls, but in this kind of system here where we're just talking about personalities and who might prefer to be prime minister, these are almost anecdotal anyway because they don't have a direct impact on the multi-party proportional voting. But they are interesting because they give you an idea what the voters are thinking in terms of leadership. In any case, if Bibi Netanyahu were not a candidate for prime minister, who would be your next choice for prime minister? And 28% of respondents supported Naftali Bennett, 18% for Gideon Sa'ar, and 18% alike for Yair Lapid. So there's an interesting poll for you, an interesting analysis there. And I've been talking about Naftali Bennett as the kingmaker, potentially, for a coalition led by Netanyahu. If Netanyahu wins, it's going to be Naftali Bennett who's the kingmaker there, most likely. And he may request a rotation in office, an opportunity to serve as prime minister. So he could very well end up being Netanyahu's successor in the big office. In any case, Yair Lapid is a major sort of stumbling block to a center-right coalition, to an effort to have Gideon Sa'ar or someone else take over as prime minister and drive Bibi from office, and thus hand political power over to the next generation of Israeli leaders who are younger, who've grown up in a more secure and more prosperous Israel, and who don't have Bibi Netanyahu's longevity in office, right, as is very much an elder statesman at this point. Well, in a recent interview with David Horowitz, Yair Lapid said that he is going to be putting his ambitions aside in the effort to unseat Bibi Netanyahu. And what he means by that is, even if he comes in second, he is willing to back someone else for prime minister. And who else would he be talking about? But, Naftali Bennett is looking to join with Bibi, but who else would he be talking about but Gideon Sa'ar, really? I mean, that's what he's going for. He's saying that he would sit back and let Gideon Sa'ar become prime minister and support him just to get Bibi Netanyahu out of office. Lapid warned that he felt that if Bibi is able to win, he will make Israel a what they call like a post-democratic state, or semi-democratic state is what some politicians are calling it, comparing Israel to Hungary and Turkey, saying that that means that basically Israel will be stuck in one-party rule and democracy will be diminished, and it'll really be a one-sided game thereafter. Well, the comparisons are not apt. Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, represents a resurgent Islamist trend in Turkish politics of late, and he has definitely moved beyond democratic accountability, no doubt there, turning Turkey into very much a presidential system from a parliamentary system and driving it in a more Islamist direction. And Turkey itself has gone out and involved itself in Syria, in Libya, and inserted itself into all these conflicts going on. But the fact is, Israel is not Turkey, and it's not headed that direction. And giving Bibi another term is not going to turn Israel into Turkey. Bibi doesn't represent that kind of resurgent religious zeal that is behind Erdogan's presidency and his rule in Turkey. Meanwhile, in Hungary, I think a lot of people misunderstand what's going on in Hungary. Years ago, about a decade ago, a little over a decade ago, the Fidesz party was able to come to power there, led by one of the men who brought Hungary out of its communist past, one of the people who transitioned Hungary to a free and democratic state. So when people speak of Viktor Orban's one-party rule in Hungary, we're not really talking about a country that is a mature democracy where one man has come to power and has just come to rule the country with an iron fist, or has moved beyond democratic accountability or something of this nature. What we're talking about in Hungary is a founding father. The left in the years of the 90s and the aught, back and forth, different governments coming and going, the center-left in Hungary made a huge mess of the government. And the people did not feel confident that they could clarify, clean up, or straighten out the mess. So they put Viktor Orban back in office, and Orban immediately moved to make a large number of reforms to the judiciary, to the political system, to strengthen the country. So Viktor Orban is like the George Washington of Hungary, not the Andrew Jackson, let's just say. So this is not a guy who's, some rough-riding outsider who comes into office guns blazing and kind of blows away the opposition. No, he's somebody who came in to clean up a mess, and he's still cleaning up that mess. Is Hungary a one-party state? Yes, to a large extent, but because Orban has been successful. And when he's no longer successful, he will no longer be in office. In any case, the comparison to Bibi Netanyahu does not fit. But I think Yair Lapid does have the valid point behind that. I mean, his comparisons being faulty doesn't diminish the point that Bibi Netanyahu has been in office for a very long time. We're going on almost 12 years consecutively, with another almost 3 years before that back in the 90s. This is the longest-serving prime minister in Israel. Every day he sets a new record for how many days in office a prime minister has been in office, right? So every day is a record that he continues in office. So his leadership has been valued by the voters, but it has also been perhaps past its time. I guess you could argue is what Yair Lapid is talking about. And honestly, Bibi Netanyahu does have a semi-narcissistic leadership style, as I've talked about before, where he drives off a lot of talented young leaders who come into his sphere. Gideon Sa'ar being only the latest, but look at the Israeli right, and it's littered with people who have left Bibi Netanyahu's sphere. Yisrael Beitenu is led by Avigdor Lieberman, a former close associate of Bibi Netanyahu. Naftali Bennett, former close associate of Bibi Netanyahu, and Gideon Sa'ar as well. Before him, Moshe Kahlon, Moshe Ya'alon, so many other politicians who were close to Bibi and shared power. He shared power with them briefly, but then he eventually drove them off. So what's the balance here? Right. I think what Yair Lapid is saying with some accuracy is that Bibi Netanyahu has been in power for a long time, and Israel does, by his continuance in office, Israel does risk one-party rule, long-term one-party rule, and leaving behind the trappings of a more nuanced, unstable, and thus accountable democracy. On the other hand, as I have pointed out in the past, in my analysis, Israel is headed into trying times. So a lot of Israeli voters are a little remiss to go and start experimenting with new prime ministers at a time when Israel is in this really difficult situation with the Biden administration and Iran and all of these things going on. So I think that's the balancing point. I don't think anyone in Israel worships the ground Bibi Netanyahu walks on, but he's provided a prosperous economy, a secure military situation, and built, with the help of President Trump, new alliances in the Middle East against Iran. And he's a bulwark. He is definitely a major part of Israel's political and economic success and its military strength and defensive posture at this point. His leaving office would encourage Israel's enemies to test their mettle, to say, is Gideon Sa'ar really up to defending Israel, or Naftali Bennett, or Yair Lapid? And one problem Israel has had in the past is when they switched to left-wing prime ministers, the terrorists and those who advocate violence on the other side tend to test their mettle early on in their administrations in the hopes that their weakness will disrupt Israel and bring victories, propaganda victories, because there aren't really a lot of victories in the battlefield, but propaganda victories for the other side, as happened in the 2006 bombardment of Israel from Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. That was a propaganda coup for Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran, who has those two organizations as their proxies, but it was a major debacle for Ehud Olmert, who was the prime minister back then, and the Kadima government that was just shown up as weak, incompetent, and unable to handle the crisis. In any case, that's kind of where things are. But I think Yair Lapid is accurately expressing a feeling on the left, and even by some people who are right-leaning, that Bibi Netanyahu's continuance in office may have some dangers attached to it. while others might argue again that more experienced leadership is required going forward for the time being. So as I mentioned before, we have Yair Lapid abnegating his ambitions for the time being, putting those in the back seat, on the back burner. He's going to set his ambitions aside, ambitions that we all know he has, his aspirations to the prime minister's office for himself, and he's going to support a candidate who can unseat Bibi Netanyahu, which would be Gideon Sa'ar, who's the main candidate against Bibi at the moment. Avigdor Lieberman, the leader of the Yisrael Beitenu party, formerly the Russian right-wing party, but now kind of Israel's secular nationalist right political party, Lieberman has said he will support whoever wins the most seats against Netanyahu. And it's not clear if he's trying to say that he would support Lapid, but I think what he's trying to articulate there is that he is going to be a team player for the anti-Bibi coalition, that he'll support whoever it is who emerges as the candidate against Bibi Netanyahu. And honestly, there's no reason that can't be Gideon Sa'ar in a coalition with Yair Lapid, perhaps with Lapid again, even though he would have more seats than Gantz, than Sa'ar. He would have more seats, but he would take a back seat and let Sa'ar lead the coalition. He could find other concessions to make in terms of building the coalition. Lieberman's saying he's going to support that effort more than anything else. So Avigdor Lieberman wants to be a team player with those who want to unseat Bibi Netanyahu. In another interesting story this week, we have a new leader in labor, and it is good to see that she is off to a good start. Now, if you listen to a few of these podcasts, you'll know that I tend to have a center-right, center-left bias in Israeli politics. It's a little bit odd, I think, for some people, perhaps, how that happens, but as I've described, the far-right nationalists and national Zionists are a little scary sometimes in their zeal for their cause, and the far left are, out of touch and kind of lost in Israel's past, whereas the center-left and the center-right have a lot of potential for leading Israel in a more positive, free market, peaceful direction, building alliances with the Arabs and so on and so forth. Well, not a great fan of the old Israeli left, but at the end of the day, you need to have two sides to every political argument. And the old left still has a place in Israeli politics, not a large place. Labor's polling down at 6-7 seats, but at the same time, they have a place. And ultimately, if the left is going to provide a counterbalance, an effective opposition, or perhaps one day an alternative to the right in terms of forming a government, Labor is going to need to be a part of that. Well, they've definitely been resuscitated and revived to life by Michaeli. Michaeli has come out with both guns blazing this week, saying that Benny Gantz should go ahead and drop out of the race, that he doesn't stand for anything anymore, that there's no reason for him to be running, that blue and white is history. And as I mentioned in the polls, blue and white is just teasing the electoral threshold down at 3.25%, earning maybe 4 seats if they clear the threshold. So Benny Gantz has lost his relevance in Israeli politics, and Michaeli is not wrong there. I think her, I think her message there to blue and white voters is that if they come over to Labor, they would give Labor a stronger position in any left-wing coalition, and of course give Labor a chance to make a better contribution to any future anti-Bibi coalition. In any case, in this situation, you cannot argue that Michaeli has a point. How when I say, I think the least I can say is she's not wrong. The most one could say is that Benny Gantz is in denial. Right? He's swimming with the crocodiles in denial. He believes that he is still politically relevant, and he said he's going to be in this to fight to the end. But when you look at his poll numbers, maybe it's time to go ahead and give up the ghost. Maybe it's time for him to withdraw his candidacy, or at least stop campaigning, back out, and acknowledge the reality that he has lost. He's not going to play a major role in the next Knesset. and that would open the door for him to return to politics perhaps in the future as a member of another party or as a minister of defense or something where he is invited to serve in those roles. But he's no longer relevant. So good for Merav Michaeli, making headlines, both guns blazing. She's letting everybody know she's there. The old left is alive and well, and Benny Gantz is irrelevant, is her message. And it's time for him to give it up, to recognize that he's been beaten and go ahead and fall. Yes, just end it. He's done. So that was a fascinating happenstance there. I think Merav Michaeli, although I find that I will disagree with her on a number of policy issues, I like that Labor has a fiery and energetic new leader who really gets it, understands how to work the media, get the headlines, make waves, make Labor relevant again, make sure that Labor constituents are heard. And one of the ways to do that is to come out with statements like this that let people know, hey, Labor's still here, we're still relevant, and we have something to say. And one of the things we have to say is that this other guy, not so much. So vote for us. All right, well, I can buy that. In something of a sad turn in Israel, it has also been noted that American political consultants who don't know much about Israel, but they're going over and they are being hired by campaigns increasingly to assist Israeli political operators in running their campaigns. The political consultant class, for those who don't know, I've run a number of campaigns in the U.S. at the state level and for Congress, so I know a little bit about political consultants. There's not so much a parasitic class in America as much as some academics, not all, but there are a good number of leeches in the world of academics for sure. And there are other places where you find people who are useless and who leech off of others, especially in the business world. We can all cite those handful of people who work at every company who really don't have a job, who really don't need to be there, and they're just leeching off of the work of others. But the most parasitic class, the most useless, harmful, destructive class that you will find are political consultants. And these leeches have crossed the ocean and are using their experience in destroying the American political world to do harm to the Israeli political world as well. And obviously they have to work with local consultants who understand the Israeli language, it's the idioms of the language and the political history, and have a sense of Israeli political history, but they are making their contribution. So it's an unfortunate thing that we in America could not keep this disease on our shores, and it has now spread to another country. I'm sorry, Israel, but on the one hand, on the other hand, hey, we don't want them. So if they want to go over there, good riddance. If they'd all moved to other countries, we'd be much happier and much better off for it. So somewhat tongue in cheek. As I do know a few political consultants I like, whom I would count among my friends, and they're not all bad. But generally speaking, the political consultant class are not helpful, not a productive or valuable element in our society. And it's sad that they're out working in Israel, and we've put them upon the Israeli society as well. On a sadder note, Israelis are feeling increasingly that their society is divided, and more divided than in the past. That deep divisions are growing in society, and that this is problematic for them. In a recent poll conducted by the Anti-Defamation League found that this is the case, and that Israelis are overwhelmingly blaming politicians, the news media, and the leading rabbis and religious establishment in Israel for these divisions. I'm going to go into a little bit of depth with that. The Anti-Defamation League is, at least in theory, the sort of NAACP, if you will, of the Jewish community. Their job is supposed to be to look out for Jewish people, to call out anti-Semitism, to try to protect Jews from attack and our reputation, and also to promote the Jewish community as an important part of American society. The ADL has increasingly become a tool of the left. They've been very active in attacking Republican presidential candidates and political officials and elected officers for really dumb reasons now at this point, looking for excuses, let's just say, to attack people on the right. So the ADL has been less and less useful. And in recent years, when, say, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, members of Congress, are out spreading dangerous anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, the ADL gives them a pass. If they say a little bit, they try to talk like they're going to talk tough. But then, for example, when the Democrat House passed a response to that, a general resolution saying that they generally oppose hate of all kinds, and somewhere buried in there was some reference to anti-Semitism. And by the way, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib both have their continuing committee assignments and their main role in Congress. Meanwhile, if a Republican member of Congress says something stupid in a tweet 2 years ago that makes no sense to anyone, and that person's going to lose their committee assignments and be politically destroyed by the media. Well. We see where that's going. Unfortunately, increasingly, anti-Semitism is becoming normalized in the political discourse, and the left is increasingly either turning a blind eye to it or kind of, again, mainstreaming anti-Semitism. It's a really sad thing to see, considering how many Jewish people are of a left-wing mindset. So wish we would stand up and be a little bit more defensive and protect Jewish interests and not so political about that sort of thing. But unfortunately, the ADL is not helpful there. However, the ADL has published this poll. They poll Israelis about these kinds of questions. And so it's the kind of institution that would ask these kinds of questions of Israelis. Well, here are some of the nature of those divisions. About a third, well, slightly less than a third, 30% of Israelis don't see the Israeli Arabs as a part of Israeli society. That's one of those things where, on the one hand, the poll shows that there are a large number of Israelis that just don't see that. On the other hand, that's kind of stating the obvious. That's not a matter of people simply having that opinion. To a large extent, it is the case that Israeli Arabs are not part of Israeli society. So that's more a statement of fact than it is of opinion. To say that, to answer yes to that poll. Yes, I think I don't see Israeli Arabs as part of Israeli society, is not necessarily bigoted. There are bigots, don't get me wrong, but that's not necessarily a bigoted position. The reality of the Arab community on the ground is that they are not, and to a large extent because they do not wish to be, but also because there's some enmity between the two. And as I've stated before, I have a slight bias toward the Israeli Arabs. Not just that I feel bad for them, but generally speaking, I do not have an anti-Arab bias myself. And these people are now beginning to seek a greater role in Israeli society, and they want greater integration. And this is where the trouble begins. So 30% of Israelis really don't see them as part of society. And that's a little bit of a problem. But it also tells you, it speaks volumes, let's just say, that is a problem that is being addressed. Bibi Netanyahu and others are addressing that particular issue. And I'm going to come back to the Arabs in just a minute on that. Another 31% of Israelis do not see the Haredi as part of Israeli society. Now, that's down from higher number. There were a larger number of people who thought that the Haredi were a part of Israeli society, I want to say. So I should say that number is up. The negative is up. The positive is down. A large number of Israelis did see, a greater number of Israelis saw the Haredi as part of Israeli society, and now fewer do. There are more people who don't see them as part of mainstream Israeli society. And a good deal of that has to do with the way they've handled the virus. They refuse to cooperate with lockdowns. They refuse to break up large groups and meetings, and they don't. Not a lot of them, not all of them, wore masks or cooperated with lockdowns and social distancing and this sort of thing. A lot of the Haredi just don't believe in germs. And I've come back and forth on this. As I've mentioned, my own bias, I'm not a fan of the Haredi lifestyle, and I definitely do not believe they have a right to have special privileges like exemption from military service and special welfare programs and an unbalanced disproportionate government assistance let's say, that I don't think they're entitled to that. But at the end of the day, these people have a right to live how they want to live. And it's not for any of us to say how they should live, as long as they are not living off of the government. Once they start taking government money, then yes, it does become the concern of other taxpayers. But this is troubling because on the one hand, I'm not sure that I would see the Haredi really as part of mainstream Israeli society either, because they aren't. To a large extent, they want to go to their religious schools, raise large families, and not participate in the economy or the military, and they don't really want to be a part of Israeli society. They keep themselves apart, somewhat like the Arabs do. On the other hand, these are Jews and Israelis, right? And I don't disagree with them on the virus. It was a complete overreaction to this COVID-19 situation, these lockdowns that really accomplished very little in terms of fighting the virus. The Haredi do not feel that it has done them any harm. The rest of Israeli society just doesn't like that they aren't cooperating. So that's troubling, though, that those kinds of opinions are there. And hopefully that will draw more attention to the issue, and hopefully Israelis will start working on how they are going to address those issues. Israel is not as young a country as it used to be. It's time for Israel to start ironing out these wrinkles rather than just ignoring them and kicking the can down the road. All right. Most Israelis, or a greater number of Israelis, think the Ethiopian Jews, which I refer to often as Beta Yisrael, that this community is the most persecuted minority, that's 21%. 21% of Israelis think Ethiopian Jews are the most persecuted minority in Israel. That's followed by 19% who think Arabs are the most persecuted, and 16% who think that the LGBTQ community is the most persecuted in Israel. Now, I will say that in Israel there is some significant bias against the LGBT community, certainly in the Arab community and among the Haredi and religious institutions. But honestly, if you go to the inner city of any city in Israel, young men walking around holding hands and young women walking around holding hands, and honestly, nobody really cares. So if you're in secular Israeli society, I would say that the LGBTQ community should feel comfortable and welcomed, and there are pride parades every year, and they're part of a modern Western society. On the other hand, the more religious elements, and again among the Arabs, they don't get the same treatment. Those are people who don't really accept that. They may be polite and tolerant of it to a limited degree, but it is definitely not something that they like, and they wouldn't want to hire someone like that or what have you. Now, if you ask the Haredi and if you ask the Arabs, each of them think they are the most persecuted minority, overwhelmingly. A majority of them feels that they are the persecuted community. So deep divisions in Israel, and that's a problem. Israelis are going to have to really think about what's their direction here. For me, it's a little bit easier, as I've said, with regard to the Haredi. But look, if they're living their life their way and they're paying their own bills, it's not my problem, right? As far as I'm concerned, and that's a very American view, I know. My Israeli friends would be saying, oh, you Americans and you're libertarian. Like, yes, okay. But the fact is, these people have a right to live how they want to live. On the other hand, they are receiving considerable government benefits. They have been kingmakers in a lot of coalitions, and they are receiving special privileges. So it's a bit of a challenge there. In other political news, Mansour Abbas, who is the leader of the Ra'am party, has split with the Joint List and is running independently, and they are just on the brink of the electoral threshold. Some polls have them above, some below. I'm not sure that the national polling agencies, are getting the Arab community quite right in their polling. That's a really difficult thing to poll, and maybe a lot of those people haven't made up their minds yet, so maybe a lot of uncertainty. But I think, I suspect, I can't say for certain, but I suspect that Ra'am will clear the threshold and have seats in the Knesset. Mansour Abbas has said that he is considering joining an Israeli government. He's talked in the past about the possibility of joining a government with the right, as Israel becomes allies with Arab states and such, that it's time for the Israeli Arab community to join the government, to participate in the society and the political structure, and to begin to integrate to a greater degree. And that would be a positive step for Israel, and would at least start to reduce that division. and bring that group of people into the Israeli mainstream. Certainly room for them, and that would be a positive step. Bibi Netanyahu has visited the Bedouins, and one Bedouin leader was quoted to say that he votes for Likud, but he feels that he's mistreated by the government. And so he had some criticisms of how Netanyahu's government handles Bedouin issues and that kind of thing. This is something you probably won't hear a lot about in the Western press. Everybody talks about, Israel's an apartheid state, Israel's evil, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we've heard it all. Okay, but Bedouins are nomadic, herding people who live in the desert in southern Israel and in the Sinai and in southern Jordan especially. It's not great land for settling on, but you can herd and move your flocks from one spot to another, and they'll have plenty to eat and that kind of thing. These people live a simple lifestyle. They are Muslims. They have been for a very long time, and they don't respond well to authority. They really don't they don't cooperate with other governments and what have you. Anecdotally, I got to speak with a young Arab man who's a Bedouin a while back when I was in Israel, and he said that Israel was the best country for the Bedouins because Israel will go out and arrest individual Bedouins whom they suspect of having committed crimes, but governments of Egypt and Jordan will just go out and shoot a bunch of Bedouins. If something happens, somebody's property is stolen or whatever, a lot of times the government officials there will just go out and shoot some Bedouins and say, here, that'll teach you, don't do it again. It's like, well, what about justice, right? So Bibi Netanyahu has promised that he's going to reform how the government treats the Bedouins and works with that community as part of his agenda, and that would be another positive step. Unfortunately, it's a little late. It would have been nice if that kind of reform had been pursued in years past. Now that Bibi is fighting for his political life, maybe a good thing of that is that out of his desperation, the Arab community and the Bedouins may see improved benefits in their situation. There may be some willingness to address issues that he didn't address before because he needs those constituencies now more than he has. Well, that's been a mouthful, and it's been quite a week. So I will be back with you next week with another exciting episode. Visit InsideIsrael.news for more exciting content from yours truly, Isaac Kite, and also find us on Facebook. So with that, I will say goodbye, להתראות.
אולי נפליגה בספינות מחוף אילת עד חוף של ועל המשחטות הישנות יטעינו תפוחי זהב. כל זה אינו משל ולא חלום.